The following compilation features unsettling and spine-chilling tales sourced from Reddit's horror communities. Reader discretion is strongly advised. These narratives may contain graphic descriptions, psychological distress, and themes that could unsettle sensitive individuals. Proceed with caution, as immersion into these eerie stories may provoke fear, unease, and sleep disturbances. Enter this realm of Reddit's creepy horror stories at your own risk, as the line between reality and the macabre may blur within these chilling narratives. The nightmare started over a month ago when I heard my husband mumble. He's standing in the garden. He's looking in the window. It must have been 2 in the morning. I sighed and rubbed my eyes. You could set your watch by him. At that time, my sleep had been disturbed regularly by Daryl's sleepwalking and sleep-talking, and sometimes sleep yelling. He'd never done anything like that before. It had just started out of the blue about 3 days prior to that night. That night, when he was whispering, mumbling while he dreamt. His voice was low and hushed. He's trying to get inside. I couldn't help but look over at the curtained windows. I imagined that if I pulled the curtains aside, I'd see a ghostly hand pressed up on the window pane. The little hairs on my neck stood on end. I shook my husband awake. He jolted like he'd just tripped over something, and his eyes shot open. He breathed heavily but quickly came to. Was I talking again? He asked out of breath. Sweat beaded his forehead. Yeah, it just keeps getting creepier. My eyes were wide. He looked over at me, his face tired. Was it the guy in the garden? I nodded. Yeah, you said he was trying to look through the windows. He rubbed his eyes and replied, I can't remember really. It's so vivid while I'm asleep, but as soon as I'm awake, it just slips away. I rubbed his arm, trying to comfort him. Let's try and get back to bed. We need to pick up Jacob early. He nodded and got out of bed to fetch some water and a melatonin pill. I drank the rest of some cold chamomile tea I'd not finished the night before. Then we went back to bed. It was about 3 in the morning when we fell back to sleep. At 7 o'clock the next morning, my alarm rang loud and shrill. I kept my eyes closed as I fumbled for it and hit the snooze button. By 7:30 we were up and on our way to the train station. Jacob was waiting for us with a large suitcase and an old worn backpack. Jacob was our nephew. He was a scrawny guy with dark brown hair and bright green eyes. Jacob had just started his final year at university and was studying zoology. He was considering starting veterinary school after his bachelor's degree was done and was visiting schools around the country. Daryl and I lived near a large veterinary hospital and school, so Jacob had come by to see if it was any good. He knew we were in the area, and so he'd decided to stay with us in the meantime. His eyes were dark and exhausted as we pulled up. How was the train? I asked as he climbed into the back seat. Daryl loaded Jacob's suitcase into the trunk and got back into the driver's seat. Delayed and uncomfortable. I was just managing to get some sleep right as I arrived. Figures, Jacob said, his voice irritable and feeble. Well, you can get plenty of rest at the house. It's quiet at the moment with everyone away for the holidays. The family of 4 next door is in Ecuador. We continued to chat as Daryl drove us home. Jacob mentioned he was excited to check out the school and would leave to take a tour the next day. I asked Daryl to drive him, but Jacob said he'd rather take the bus so he could get to know the area better. The day after that was Sunday, so we slept in and had breakfast food for lunch. After that, Jacob left for the bus stop. Daryl and I did some chores, and then we sat down to read. The air was peaceful and quiet. I remember it was the last time I had felt relaxed, felt normal and comfortable in my own home. The day had been warm and bright, and sunbeams illuminated small motes of dust in the air. Pretty soon Daryl and I both fell asleep on the couch, leaning against one another. Suddenly there was a loud shout, and I sat up, my eyes wide and suddenly very awake. Daryl was sitting up straight, his chest heaving heavily with breath. That was a bad one, he panted. What happened? Why did you shout? I asked, my hand on my chest. I was dreaming. About that guy again. Except he wasn't alone this time. This time he was with a woman. They were standing just outside. He turned to look at the window. They were throwing rock. Out of nowhere there was the deafening shatter of glass. I yelled. Darryl leapt to his feet in fright. I glanced down at the floor. Among a pile of broken glass lay a single rock. It was small, dark, and smooth as glass. As soon as I looked at it, I felt a cold trail of goose flesh run down my neck and arms. There was something so unnatural about that rock. It looked artificially polished. Darryl and I ran to the window, carefully avoiding the shards. There was nothing outside save my front yard. My petunias and crane lilies waved gently in the breeze. No one was standing there. The air was thick with silence. All the neighbors were still away on holiday. Darryl and I looked at one another, our eyes searching each other's expressions for some kind of explanation. I was hoping Darryl would declare himself the mastermind of this terrifying practical joke, but no confessions came. "Must be kids playing a prank," he said as he cleaned the glass and tossed the stone into the yard. But his face was still white and his hands trembled. He wasn't quite convinced. Later that same evening, Jacob returned from his sightseeing and was thrilled. We decided not to tell Jacob about what had happened, and Darryl, being a very proficient engineer, had already replaced the window pane that afternoon. Jacob couldn't stop going on about the facilities and the local cafes. We were happy for him as we ordered pizza and watched some silly rom-coms. We all went to bed at around midnight. As I lay in bed and turned off my light, I couldn't help but look over at the curtained windows momentarily. The curtains hung ruby red and still as stone. Was there someone standing outside? I shivered as I rolled over in bed and cuddled up close to my husband. I was glad to have my back to the window. I felt like I'd just closed my eyes when I was disturbed. I had turned over while half asleep and found myself suddenly alone in bed. It's always disconcerting to find yourself unexpectedly alone in the middle of the night. At first, my face still buried in a pillow, I figured Darryl was on the toilet. As I rolled over and opened my eyes, I noticed a figure standing at the foot of our bed. It was Darryl. I jumped from fright and yelped. "My God, Darryl, you frightened me," I said as I clutched my chest and breathed hard. "What are you doing standing there?" I asked. Darryl did not stir. His back still faced me. He seemed to be staring at the curtains in front of him. Then he spoke, and it filled me with terror. "They're outside. They're calling," he said, his voice flat and vacant. He was sleep-talking again, and now he was sleepwalking. I felt my stomach fill with boiling lead. "Come back to bed," I said shakily as I slowly sat up. Something wasn't right. "They're outside. They're coming." His voice sounded slurred, like he'd been drinking. Darryl took a few quick steps toward the window. I felt my heart skip a beat. I ripped the duvet off my legs, but as my feet touched the floor, there was a tremendous smash. I screamed as the window to my right shattered into 1,000 pieces. The sudden commotion made me lose my balance, and I fell on the ground hard. I felt a frigid gust howl through the broken window. "What?" I didn't get a chance to finish speaking before the window in front of Darryl exploded too. The wind that blasted through was so strong and cold it forced my eyes closed. My teeth began to chatter. How was it suddenly so cold? "Darryl?" The wind died down and I opened my eyes. Darryl was gone. My mind felt empty. My limbs were heavy. Confusion washed over me. "Darryl?" I said again. The wind had vanished and the chill in the air had retreated completely. I slowly stood. My eyes searched the ground for signs of another rock, but there was nothing. I walked up to the closest smashed window. When I looked outside, all I saw was my garden shrouded in darkness. The half-moon was obscured by wispy clouds. "What?" I whispered, unable to comprehend what had just happened. I suddenly heard a hoarse whisper behind me. "Auntie Valerie, what's going on?" I spun around to see the dark silhouette of Jacob standing in my bedroom doorway. I could just make out the look of worry on his face. "I'm not sure. Your uncle is missing. I'm not sure what happened. The windows, they broke. I think I need to call the police." I hurried over to my phone and called 911. Within 15 minutes, 2 exhausted-looking police officers arrived and took my statement. I trembled as I spoke. I told them everything. I told them about my husband's dreams. I told them about the smashed window from the afternoon, and I also showed them the mess in my bedroom. They were sympathetic and offered to drive me to the hospital for a checkup. I declined. I just needed rest. They told me not to worry. that my husband probably hadn't gotten far, that he must have broken the windows in his sleep. When I tried to tell them there was no way my husband broke the windows, one of the cops said, "Look, people can do weird and out-of-character things while sleepwalking. We once had to go fetch some teenage kid from some park in the middle of the night. He was up some tree and refused to climb down. He'd done it all in his sleep." They said they'd look around the area and let me know if they found him. Jacob gave a statement too, but he had been asleep. After he heard the window smash, he'd gone through to investigate. A few minutes after the police left, I found myself sitting on my couch with a cup of cocoa clutched in my still shaking hands. Jacob sat near me and tried to comfort me. He got me a blanket. I was still unable to comprehend what had happened. My eyes stared into space, unblinking. Where had Daryl gone? Who were those people? I felt a lump of dread lodge itself in my stomach. What the hell had happened? A week went by. The police still had no information. Jacob postponed going home to help look after me. He was really such a sweet kid. It was late in the afternoon and I was preparing lunch. Suddenly Jacob walked into the kitchen. Auntie Valerie, can I talk with you?" I stopped dicing onions and looked up at him. His expression was guilty. He was awkwardly rubbing the back of his neck with his hand. "Yes. What's up?" I said curiously, putting down the knife. He looked embarrassed. His eyes couldn't meet mine. I kind of lied. To the police, and you, about what happened that night, last week, when it happened." I felt my breath catch in my throat. My heart fluttered. What do you mean?" I said. He paused. It seemed to last forever. The room felt so silent, I could hear my heart thump loudly in my chest. Jacob still couldn't meet my gaze as he replied, "I forgot to close my curtains that night, and something must have disturbed me in my sleep, because I woke up in the middle of the night before the windows smashed. When I sat up in bed, I froze. I saw people standing outside, at least a dozen people. I couldn't see their faces, just dark shapes, their outlines. They were all in the garden. I didn't know what to do. Then suddenly I heard the windows smash and I got distracted. I looked away from my window for a second, and when I looked back..." He paused. Tears were now forming in his eyes. "I saw Uncle Daryl. He was standing right at my window. He was staring in at me. I couldn't see his eyes, but I knew it was him. Slowly he turned around and walked away. As I blinked, he vanished. That's when I got out of bed and came out to see you. I was convinced I had dreamt the whole thing. I mean, how could that be possible? I was scared the cops, that you, would think I was crazy. But now I don't think it was just my imagination. I've seen them again. Not in my dreams. I mean, I saw them outside my window. I saw them last night. I don't know what's happening. I think I should go home, but I don't want to abandon you." He was crying now. His voice was full of fear. I was shaking. I tried to keep my voice calm. "Don't worry, my boy. Everything's going to be fine. I'm sure it was just a dream. I mean, I didn't actually see anyone else myself. The police are probably right. They'll find your uncle." I gave him a big hug. "Maybe it would be a good idea for you to go home. You must miss your own bed. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine. And after everything that's happened, you should go home. I'm sure your parents are anxious to see you. Let's get you sorted." Within an hour, Jacob was packed and I drove him to the train station. We didn't speak much on the way there, and when we said goodbye, I gave him an extra tight hug. I'd never admit it to him, but I was dreading going back home alone, back to that same bed. The bedroom windows had been repaired, but I still felt a cold wind whenever I looked at them. It was 2 o'clock the next morning when my phone started ringing. Groggily, I reached over to my bedside table. I answered, my voice croaky from sleep. "Yes," I said, sitting up. I switched on my light. They were on the train. I heard a flat, monotone voice answer. A chill rippled down my spine. "Jacob," I said softly. "They were on the train. They found me." All traces of sleep vanished from my voice. "Jacob, this isn't funny," I said angrily. I was terrified at that moment. There was a slight pause before he continued. They're outside your house too. They're outside. They want to come inside. What the hell do they want, Jacob? Are you okay? Suddenly the phone went dead. I just sat in bed. My nerves were burning with fear. I didn't get any sleep that night. I wasn't surprised when I got a call from my sister a few hours later. Jacob had never got home. I told her and the police I'd dropped him off, and the security footage at the train station confirmed my story. It even showed him board the train at 6:30 that evening. He'd taken an overnight train. But the security footage from his destination showed no trace of him. Just like Daryl, he had vanished. I also hadn't told anyone about Jacob's phone call, and the police never brought it up. Had it ever happened? I decided not to tell my sister anything more than what I'd told the police. I felt a numbness in my brain and body that refused to abate. I hardly had the motivation to do anything except eat and drink for days after that. I haven't been able to leave my house for 2 weeks now. I never open the curtains anymore. Every night I sit in my living room, the lights on, and every night since Jacob disappeared, I've heard a gentle tapping. A tapping on my living room windows. Last night I heard their voices for the first time. I heard Daryl and Jacob. They were both calling me, stretching out the vowels in my name as they spoke. Valerie, Valerie. They want to come in, Valerie. They just want to talk. It's not so bad, Valerie. I felt completely helpless. The police were useless, of course. Whenever I called them and they showed up, the things outside would vanish. They now told me to stop bothering them or they'd charge me with wasting police time. And it seems that running away wasn't really an option. The sun is beginning to set, and I find myself sitting once again in my living room. I've boarded up all my windows and sit on my sofa clutching a golf club in my hands. Maybe I can't stop them from getting inside, but I'd be damned if I wasn't going to put up a fight. I've also left myself a secret way out just in case, but won't write that down here. I don't want them to find it out. The sun is now completely gone. I can hear the tapping on my window. It is louder than before. My grip on the golf club tightens. The tapping has now turned into full-on knocking. Someone was banging their fists hard on the boarded windows. I've decided to write this all down so that when I suddenly disappear, people may be able to figure out what happened here. Maybe they can find Daryl or Jacob, or me, but I figure it's likely no one will ever see me again. Perhaps it won't be so bad. At least I will be with Daryl and Jacob again soon. I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but I'm desperate for help or advice. I don't know if anyone will believe me, but I need to share what happened. It all started when my Aunt Meredith died a few months ago. The night she passed, I had this vivid nightmare. I was climbing an endless staircase in a house that kept growing taller. Every time I thought I reached the top, a new floor would appear. My legs ached, my lungs burned, but I couldn't stop climbing. I knew that if I did, I'd fall all the way down, back to where I started. I woke up gasping for air, my phone ringing with news of Aunt Meredith's death. After our parents passed years ago, my sister Emily spiraled down a dark path for a few years, leaving me to forge a bond with Aunt Meredith, who rented a small apartment in the city back then. I spent countless evenings with her, sharing tea and stories while gently petting her cat, Willis. The reading of Aunt Meredith's will was a shock. Emily inherited a house none of us knew existed, while I got Willis. The injustice of it burned. Emily, who barely called Aunt Meredith except for money, got a home, while I, despite my decent job, remained trapped in an overpriced shoebox apartment. With the housing market as insane as it is, owning a home felt like an impossible dream for me. Our resulting fight over this uneven inheritance left us estranged for months. Then last night my phone lit up at 2 a.m. with Emily's name. "Liz," Emily's voice trembled on the other end, "I need you to come over, to the house." The house, that dilapidated two-story in a forgettable neighborhood with its peeling paint and overgrown yard. The house that should have been mine, or so I'd childishly thought. I swallowed my pride and the bitter taste of jealousy. "Em, it's the middle of the night. What's going on?" "Please," she whispered. I want you to have it. The house. Just come." I was silent for a moment, then scoffed. "So you're calling me at 2 a.m. to tell me you want to give me the house you wouldn't even let me rent a room in a few months ago?" Are you using again? The irritation in my voice was palpable. No, she clamored. Just come over, please. Each word sounded like it was being dragged over broken glass. I'll come over later today, I promise. I need you now, she cut me off, her voice rising to a near shriek. I could hear her crying, gasping on the verge of hyperventilating. My mind and anxiety raced. What if she was using and alone on a bad trip, riddled with guilt over taking the house instead of sharing it with me? Or what if she was having a panic attack, realizing she couldn't take care of the place or afford it? Could she be in sleep-deprived psychosis and need help? I sighed heavily. Okay, I'm on my way. The drive over was a blur of streetlights and confusion, and as I pulled up to the curb, I had to double-check the address. This couldn't be right. The dilapidated two-story I remembered first seeing a few months ago had transformed. Fresh paint gleamed in the moonlight. The yard was immaculately manicured, and there was even a new porch swing. It looked like it had been plucked from a home renovation show. Still, as I approached, a chill ran down my spine. Even though the house looked beautiful, shadows seemed to writhe across the facade, the darkness of them unnaturally deep. The air felt thick, oppressive, carrying a coppery scent that made my stomach churn. I found the front door ajar. Emily? My voice seemed swallowed by the musty air. Stepping inside, I was struck by the interior. Modern furniture clashed with antique fixtures. Sleek, minimalist pieces sat beside ornate, centuries-old decorations. It was as if the house couldn't decide which era it belonged to. I kept walking as the floorboards creaked ominously under my feet. Emily! I called again. Up here. Her voice drifted down from upstairs, oddly flat. As I crept up the stairs, I felt like I was wading through molasses. Family portraits hung on the wall, their eyes following my ascent. Each step up felt heavier than the last. Dizziness washed over me, and whispers just below audibility swirled around my head. When I reached the top, I saw Emily standing at the end of the hallway, her back to me. Em, what's going on? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She turned slowly, and I barely stifled a scream. It looked like Emily, but her eyes were wrong. Too dark, too empty. When she smiled, it stretched unnaturally wide across her face. Oh, Liz, not Emily said, her voice a chorus of others. I'm so glad you came. We've been waiting for you. I stumbled backward, my back hitting the hallway wall. Picture frames rattled, accompanied by what sounded like children's laughter. What are you talking about? Where's Emily? Where's my real sister? Not Emily's grin widened impossibly further. Emily is here. We're all here. And soon you'll... I ran before Not Emily could even finish the last sentence. Blind with terror, I crashed down the stairs, slamming into walls as I desperately sought the exit. Behind me, I heard a cacophony of voices, some calling my name with hungry eagerness, others screaming for help. As I burst through the front door, I heard Emily's voice, her real voice, call out from somewhere deep within the house. Liz, help me! Don't leave me here! I froze on the porch, torn between self-preservation and the need to save my sister. In that moment of hesitation, I felt something cold brush against my ankle. I looked down to see a tendril of shadow coiling around my leg, trying to pull me back inside. With a scream, I wrenched myself free, stumbling onto the neatly manicured lawn. As I caught my breath, I felt a familiar nudge against my leg. Willis? How did he get here? His eyes gleamed in the darkness, and he meowed insistently, looking back at the house. It was almost as if he was urging me to go back in. Heart pounding, I heard Emily's continued screams for help, and I realized I couldn't leave my sister. I had to find her. I ran back inside, and I followed her voice, dodging grasping shadows and whispers that grew teeth. I found her in the attic, surrounded by dust-covered relics and dozens of mirrors. As I reached for Emily's hand, I noticed her skin was pale, almost translucent. Her eyes, once warm brown, now reflected the room like polished glass. Not Emily's voice echoed around us, seeming to come from every reflective surface. As she spoke, her mouth moved a fraction of a second after the words, like a badly dubbed film. Oh, Liz, Aunt Meredith always said you had your father's eyes. Her head tilted at an impossible angle, neck stretching unnaturally. Come, See for yourself. These mirrors don't just reflect us, they receive us. The temperature in the attic plummeted. My breath came out in visible puffs as Not Emily continued, her smile widening beyond the confines of her face. We're the legacy this house inherits piece by piece, generation after generation. As she spoke, I saw flickers of other faces superimposed over hers, men, women, children, all wearing the same grotesque smile. The family album is always expanding, and there's a frame waiting just for you. Emily! I grabbed her ice-cold hand, but as we turned to flee, the attic door slammed shut. One ancient-looking mirror began to ripple like disturbed water, and the floor beneath us softened and shifted. I leapt for the door, but Emily sank into the now liquid wood, her eyes wide with terror. The last thing I saw before the darkness claimed my sister was her reflection in the mirror, now calm and serene, taking its place among the house's eternal residents. I managed to wrench the attic door open and tumble down the stairs, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't stop running until I was in my car, speeding away from that cursed place. As I sit here typing this, I'm shaking. I don't know what to do. Emily's not just trapped there, she's become a part of that monstrous dwelling. I can't go to the police, they'd never believe me. I'm going to start researching, try to find a way to end this, but I'm scared. What if I can't stop it? What if I go back and become part of the family portrait? I don't know how I'm going to sleep tonight, but I am comforted that Willis is here snuggling next to me. Still, as I look at him, I can't help but wonder, why did Aunt Meredith leave him to me in her will? Officer Dave Mulligan wiped the sleep from his eyes as he pulled up to the scene in his cruiser, the red and blue lights swirling lazily in the early morning mist. It was 5:45 a.m., just before dawn, the time of day when nothing made sense to anyone awake. The call had come in less than 20 minutes ago, a disturbance on the outskirts of town, a small neighborhood that bordered the local forest preserve. The dispatcher didn't have many details beyond a crowd forming and unusual activity. That alone was enough to make his morning interesting. As he turned the corner onto Mill Street, he could already see the crowd of locals gathered at the far end of the block, spilling out into the middle of the road. They were standing in tight clusters, all facing the same direction like a congregation, murmuring among themselves with a mix of confusion and something close to reverence. Dave pulled the cruiser to a stop. Frowning at the mass of people, he flicked on his radio. "This is Mulligan. I'm at Mill Street. Got a crowd here, maybe 30, 40 people. Gonna check it out." "Roger that, Mulligan," came the dispatcher's voice, crackling over the static. "Be advised, National Guard is being mobilized for some areas. Just a heads up." He blinked at the radio, processing that. The National Guard, for a crowd of early risers. "Copy," he said, shaking his head and stepping out of the car. His boots hit the asphalt with a dull thud, and he adjusted his belt as he approached the crowd. Whatever was going on, it had the whole block's attention. A few people noticed him and parted ways slightly, giving him an uneasy look. Dave didn't like the atmosphere. There was an odd stillness in the air, like something unnatural was hanging over them all. He walked up to a heavy-set man in a bathrobe standing near the back of the group. "Hey, what's going on here?" The man looked at him with wide eyes, his face pale. You better take a look, officer. There's something up there on the roof." Dave's frown deepened, and he pushed through the crowd until he was standing at the front, facing a modest 2-story house at the end of the street. His eyes followed where everyone else was looking, and then he saw it. On the roof of the house, kneeling on the shingles like it was offering up a prayer, was a figure. A small, hunched creature, about 5 feet tall, its features barely distinguishable in the dim morning light. It was humanoid, no doubt about that, but it was wrapped in something like a cloak or robe, its face hidden under a shadowy hood. Its hands were clasped together in front of it, and it was perfectly still, as though locked in some deep, silent meditation. Dave's first instinct was that it was some kind of prank, a sick joke played by teenagers with too much time on their hands. But as he stared at the thing on the roof, a cold, creeping sensation started to gnaw at the back of his mind. This wasn't a mannequin, and it wasn't some kid dressed up. The stillness of the figure, the strange aura around it. It didn't feel right. "What the hell is that?" Dave muttered to himself. A woman next to him clutched her jacket tightly around her shoulders, whispering under her breath. "It's been there for an hour, just kneeling." Dave turned to her. "You see anyone put it up there? Anyone messing around before this?" She shook her head, her eyes wide. "No, officer, no one's been near it. It just appeared." He bit back a retort and pulled his radio up again. "Dispatch, this is Mulligan. I've got eyes on something here. You're going to want to get the chief out here, maybe a couple more cars. Hell, maybe even a helicopter if we can spare it." "Roger that, Mulligan. National Guard is already en route to multiple locations. Hold tight." That phrase again, National Guard. Something more was going on. Dave couldn't shake the unease prickling his skin. This wasn't the only sighting, was it? He moved closer to the house, trying to get a better look. As he stepped onto the lawn, his footfalls silent on the dewy grass, he could hear the crowd murmuring nervously behind him. His hand hovered over the grip of his pistol, but he didn't draw it. Not yet. He wasn't even sure if this thing was alive, let alone dangerous. When he reached the base of the house, he looked up, trying to see the creature's face, but it was still shrouded in darkness. He called up to it, his voice firm but hesitant. "Hey, you up there! What are you doing? Come down!" No response. The figure didn't move an inch. Dave's hand drifted down to his flashlight, and he clicked it on, aiming the beam at the thing on the roof. The light hit the creature, casting harsh shadows across its form. It was definitely humanoid, though its skin, or was that fabric, looked wrong, like it was both solid and transparent at the same time. The texture reminded him of smoke or mist trapped in a mold, as if it wasn't entirely real. "Jesus," Dave breathed, his fingers tightening around the flashlight. He felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Behind him, the crowd shifted uneasily. Whispers floated through the air, people muttering prayers, others questioning what they were seeing. More people were showing up by the minute, drawn by the strange spectacle. A few tried to snap photos with their Polaroids, but most just stared in a kind of quiet awe. The radio crackled to life on his belt. "Mulligan, this is Chief Henderson. I'm 5 minutes out. What's your status?" Dave lifted the radio to his lips. "We've got a situation here, Chief. You're going to want to see this for yourself. I can't really explain it." The chief's voice came back, calm but tense. "Just hold the perimeter. National Guard's en route. Don't let anyone get too close." "Understood," Dave replied, glancing back at the crowd. Some of them had edged closer to the house, as if drawn toward the figure by an invisible pull. "Hey, everyone back up," he called out. "Stay behind the sidewalk." A few people grumbled, but most obeyed, shuffling backward. Dave could sense the growing anxiety in the air. He felt it too, a gnawing tension that made his stomach churn. This thing, whatever it was, wasn't right. There was something deeply unsettling about its presence, something that set off every instinct in his body. 5 minutes later, Chief Henderson's cruiser pulled up alongside Dave's, and the older man stepped out, looking every bit as groggy and confused as Dave had felt when he first arrived. The chief was a no-nonsense type, a man who'd been through his share of crises, but even he seemed taken aback when he saw the creature on the roof. "What in God's name is that?" Henderson muttered, walking up to stand beside Dave. "I don't know," Dave replied, his voice low. "It's just been kneeling there, praying or something. People say it just appeared out of nowhere." The chief stared at the figure for a long moment, his jaw clenched. "National Guard's already mobilized," he said after a pause. "They're sealing off other areas where similar reports have come in." "Other areas?" Dave raised an eyebrow. Henderson nodded grimly. "We're not the only ones, Mulligan. Calls are coming in from all over the state. Hell, all over the country. By the sound of it, same description. Humanoid figure preying on rooftops and hills. It's spreading fast." Dave felt a chill run down his spine. What the hell is this, Chief? Some kind of protest? A cult? "I wish I knew," Henderson replied, running a hand through his graying hair. "But I'll tell you this much. This isn't some local prank. Whatever's going on, it's bigger than us." As if on cue, the distant hum of helicopters filled the air, and moments later, a National Guard chopper swooped in low. circling above the neighborhood. Dave shielded his eyes from the glare of the spotlight as it swept over the scene, illuminating the crowd and the figure on the roof. "Looks like the cavalry's here," Dave muttered, though he didn't feel reassured. If anything, the presence of the military only made the situation feel more surreal, more dangerous. A convoy of military vehicles rolled up moments later, soldiers jumping out to form a perimeter around the house. Their movements were efficient and disciplined, but Dave could see the same look of confusion on their faces as they stared at the creature on the roof. One of the soldiers, a young lieutenant by the look of him, approached Dave and Henderson. "We're securing the area, officers. Orders are to keep civilians back and prevent any direct contact with the entity." The chief nodded. "We've got the crowd under control for now, but what's the plan?" The lieutenant hesitated, glancing up at the figure. "Honestly, sir, we don't know yet. Higher-ups are scrambling to figure out what we're dealing with. For now, we're just supposed to contain it." Dave exchanged a glance with Henderson. Contain it? How were they supposed to contain something that wasn't moving, wasn't attacking, something that just knelt there, praying in silence? As the day wore on, more soldiers arrived, setting up barricades and cordoning off the area. News vans started to appear, reporters jostling for position as they tried to get footage of the strange phenomenon. The whole situation had the feel of a circus, except no one was laughing. People were scared, and the presence of the National Guard only amplified the tension. By noon, the sky was a dull grey, thick clouds rolling in from the west. The creature on the roof hadn't moved an inch, but the weight of its presence seemed to press down on everyone. Dave had stayed at the scene, watching as the crowd grew and the media swarmed. Every so often he glanced up at the figure, half expecting it to vanish or change somehow, but it remained the same, locked in its eternal prayer. At one point, a group of religious zealots showed up, waving signs and chanting about the end of days. They gathered just outside the barricades, shouting at the soldiers and the police, declaring that the creatures were a sign from God. Dave tried to ignore them, but their words dug into his mind. A sign of what? By mid-afternoon, the tension had reached a breaking point. More reports were flooding in from across the country. Hundreds of these creatures had appeared, all of them in the same posture, on rooftops and hillsides, in cities and rural towns. No one had any answers, and fear was spreading like wildfire. Dave stood by the barricade, watching the crowd, his hands clenched into fists. He didn't know what to make of any of it. None of this felt real, but the weight of it, the sheer scale of it, pressed down on him like a lead blanket. And then, as the sun began to set, something happened. The creature on the roof moved. It was subtle at first, a slight shift in its posture, the faintest twitch of its head. But Dave saw it, and so did the crowd. A murmur rippled through the air, people gasping and pointing. "Chief!" Dave called out, turning to Henderson, who was standing a few feet away. Henderson looked up just as the creature slowly lowered its hands from the prayer position, placing them on the roof beside it. Its hooded head tilted upward, as if gazing at the darkening sky. The crowd fell silent, a palpable sense of dread filling the air. And then, in one smooth motion, the creature stood up. The silence broke in an instant. People screamed, soldiers raised their weapons, reporters shoved forward to get a better shot. Dave's heart raced as he stared at the figure, now fully upright on the roof. It stood there, motionless, its face still hidden in shadow. "What do we do?" one of the soldiers shouted, panic edging into his voice. "Hold your fire," the lieutenant ordered, though he sounded uncertain. The creature stood still for a moment longer, then turned its head, slowly scanning the horizon. Dave watched, frozen in place, as it took one step forward, then another. And then, without warning, it leapt off the roof. Gasps and screams filled the air as the creature descended, landing with an eerie grace in the middle of the street. It straightened up, its form towering over the crowd, casting a long, dark shadow in the fading light. Dave's hand went to his gun, but he didn't draw it. He wasn't sure what good it would do. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If you dare to explore further, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling tales of horror and the supernatural. Remember, the shadows hold endless mysteries, waiting to be unveiled. Stay tuned for more bone-chilling stories. as we continue to traverse the eerie depths of the unknown together. Until next time, may your dreams be free from the haunting echoes of our tales. Or perhaps not.